You're listening to Monday Matters, a Principal Matters podcast production.
Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, along with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, with you for another Monday Matters. Jen, it's February. Can you believe it?
I know.
And it's the love time of the year. This is going to be coming out right after Valentine's Day. So why don't we talk about something that's just so dear to our hearts? AI, so that warms my heart, right? We've had a lot of questions from people, but you and I have been also chewing on some of these questions, like what are the positives? What are the challenges? How is AI affecting the work of principals and teachers? And so this isn't a Q&A. This is Monday Matters, where you and I just get to reflect on things we're learning. So I want to just throw the ball your direction first, and I've got some thoughts I want to bring here. But tell us some things you've been thinking about and learning about as you work with educators as they try to manage AI in schools.
Right. It's a spectrum of fear, anxiety, confidence, resignation, everything, all the feelings with AI. And I think we start by saying AI is not new, right? AI has been in our education space for quite some time. Spell check is AI. Text to speech is AI. A lot of the assistive technology tools that we have grown to use in the special education and EL space are AI. Translation is space. Is AI. So it's there. What's happening is it's moving rapidly. It's evolving without our input or without time to learn how to best use it. And that's scary. And I've seen, in my conversations with principals across the country and really even internationally, I've heard everything from, and this is almost a direct quote from a principal, my staff, we're just not going to do it. We're just not going to do AI, which is not possible. Spoiler alert. To embracing it with wild abandon and not having protocols or systems in place for what does it even mean to say we're using AI? What does that even mean? I think teachers are all over the map on this as well. Students are using it, though. This is what we have to understand. Students are using it. They're fast with it. They're smart with it. They are, it would be foolish to think that we can tell students, hey, don't use AI on this, and that they won't. So that's a whole lot that I just said there. What I think our best steps forward is to control what we can control, learn what we can learn, see how these tools do influence our work, and see how that applies to students. AI has transformed a lot of what I do as a leader. My response to emails, the capabilities to polish emails, it's saving an enormous amount of time. Of course, that time's filled with something else, but we can talk about specific tools here in a minute. But I guess I just wanted to open with that overview of we can't run from it, we can't hide it, but we also shouldn't just say, okay, wild, wild west, let's go. We should be more thoughtful.
No, I agree. And so there's this tension, and you and I've talked about this in so many other settings. On one side of the pendulum, you've got the no access, don't want to touch it, don't want students to ever have access to it either, because refusing to participate in it will protect me from the dangers of it. And then on the other side of the pendulum, you've got the, as you called it, the wild abandonment, which is the no policies, procedures, expectations, just let's play with it, see how far we can get with it, and then deal with the repercussions. And sadly, what you and I are describing is something much deeper than the tool. The tool is, and I'm not saying this as an expert, Jen. I'm just saying this as an observer of the culture and the time in which we live. And it's going to be funny to listen back to this 2 years from now, because I started talking about ChatGPT, for instance, with one of my guests a couple of years ago when it first came out. He was one of the first principals to begin to talk about this with his students and try to set protocols. And now 2 years later, it's a completely different format than it was then. But what we're really talking about is a technology that's been created by industries, all of whom are unregulated. No technology industries are regulated. And so we now have the tool in our hand of an unregulated technology that's more powerful than all the other ones have been before that. Social media was unregulated too. And we saw the effects of like all of the effects we had to deal with there, trying to figure out how to manage it and do school at the same time. And the pendulum kept swung back and forth on students' access to phones, not having access to phones, students putting their phones away when they come into class, students using their phones as a part of learning. And so it's gone, you and I have watched these pendulum swings over and over in our career. So you've already touched on this, which is like, okay, then how do we step forward with wisdom? And how do we control what we can control? And how do we learn to use it to our advantage where we can, while at the same time not being blind to its dangers? So I know you've had some other conversations with people that have found value, but also have talked about important boundaries too. So, what do you want to add to that?
Well, like you, I've done some reading about the unregulation or dysregulation of AI. And we know from the tech companies that there are people working on AI that are concerned about it. We know that it is closely tied to money and profits, and it's a murky world. But at the end of the day, it's here, and I think for school leaders, for their purposes, we have to educate ourselves about this. We can't just pretend that it's not here. We have to look at the tools. We have to, and I'm actually not going to name any by names, but there are vendors out there who are trying to capitalize on this, and the tools that they offer might not be as helpful as some of the tools that naturally embed into what we're already using. So I would urge administrators to use a tool that isn't something new or something that's an outlier or a standalone. Um, right now, there's a lot of free AI tools, and I think that's probably temporary. I think that there will always be a price tag attached to this in some way, shape, or form. Um, and again, I think that we have to have conversations with our teachers about this, with our parents, um, and we can't bury our head in the sand. I talked to a principal who said they were going to refuse to write use of AI into IEPs. And I said, well, let's just talk about that. When you do that, not only do you sound archaic and delusional, but you're also keeping a tool from a child that might make them more successful. The key being the right tool. So rather than be impulsive or abrupt with our decision making, I think we have to really put aside the judgment and embrace the curiosity.
I'm glad you said that. There's a lot of directions we could go as we you know think about how we want to wrap up our Monday matters. But I'm going to do something a little provocative, and I'm going to invite Emily, who edits our show and is my executive assistant, into this conversation to open her mic because, just for some context, Emily is in her mid-20s. Emily is my oldest daughter. Emily has a degree in psychology, but also in Emily, your second degree is in data science. I'm not sure what you would call your master's. So you and I work together a lot. We use a lot of technology. You're very careful when it comes to AI. So I'd love to get your voice in this conversation too. And I warned Jen about this ahead of time. But why are you so cautious as a user, especially someone who's young and not afraid of technology? So talk to Jen and me about some of those things that you think about as you're dealing with technology and you use a lot of it.
I think one of the things that I'm most cautious about when it comes to AI and specifically like ChatGPT is that when ChatGPT was being built, AI models are just trained on all kinds of different source material. And unfortunately for creatives, that means that a lot of authors got their work plagiarized and a lot of artists got their work plagiarized. And so I'm just cautious around using ChatGPT because I think it crosses the line into plagiarism when you're using it to create and write things. And then another reason I'm cautious about AI is that it is very bad for the environment. It uses up a lot of water. It puts a lot of pollutants into the environment. It uses up a lot of energy. Um, and it uses a lot of resources that are not renewable and are finite. And so I'm just very, very cautious about my usage of AI because I want to be conscientious of the fact that it has some very negative impacts on the environment and on creatives and that kind of thing.
Well, and I thank you, Emily. And by the way, listeners, Emily is not new to this show. She's always with Will and I, and we love her, and we're so glad she was willing to turn on her mic today. I want to speak for a moment about the creatives because that's absolutely true, and that actually happened to me with one of my books. But here's the thing: it happened with permission. My publisher said, "Hey, we're going to pay you a little bit here and they're going to use your book." And I struggled because part of me wanted to say, no, you're not. I wrote that. That's my heart, my soul, my words. But I also know it's a losing battle, right? Because they're either going to steal it or they're going to ask permission before they steal it. So that's tricky. And I really do worry about the artists and the creatives. There was a fantastic, thorough article written about this. I encourage leaders to find it. It was about a year ago and it was in the Atlantic, and it really is worth a read because I think, to Emily's point about the environment and the impact on humans, creatures, the earth, we have to be wise and educated and read about this. So thanks for blowing the world open on that, Emily.
There's a couple of other things that I'll add for, potential resources. And I have not read this book, but I got to listen to a presentation when I was in Miami. Emily and I were actually there with my wife, Missy, for a conference. And the conference organizers had invited in mostly just educators, but they invited also in Kara Swisher, who wrote a book called Burn Book, a tech love story. She's been a journalist for 30 years who's focused just on emerging technologies. So she's actually known and interviewed every CEO of these large tech companies that we all know today, most of whom she was friends with until just the last few years when her values and their values seemed to no longer be in alignment. So I won't read you the back jacket has different responses from different tech billionaires who've read her book. And I won't read you what some of them have said about her because they don't like her. But her book is one that I would recommend to just understand why there's so much emotion tied around technology. But then when it comes to practice, I don't want to be ignorant of the fact, and Jen, you touched on this already, that so many of the tools we're already using already have AI embedded in them, and they're amazing. I mean, I use Canva all the time, and Canva uses AI to generate images that are not copy. They're ethically sourced, images, but they've used AI now for a long time. Grammarly uses AI. There's a post by a friend of mine, Jethro Jones, who I've had as a guest on my show before, and Jethro has spent a lot of time diving into lots of different AI tools, and he's put together a list called Best AI Tools for Educators Today. It's just a free resource, and I'll put it as a link in the show notes just because he's taken a lot of time to play with these resources and reach out to other educators who are trying to figure out how to use them in the most useful way. And so I'll end my thoughts with this because even Kara Swisher, who I got to hear talk, said that she uses every one of these technologies herself, including, I think she mentioned ChatGPT in particular, primarily because she wants to know how to harness it for her good and for the good of for the best use of that technology. But she doesn't put her blinders on. She realizes that at the same time, someone is going to use it for bad. And so how do we digest all this as leaders? And I think we just have to come back to the same things we've always done as leaders, which is we don't decide alone. We bring other people together to help us determine what the protocols and boundaries need to be. We do the best we can in setting what those boundaries need to be moving forward. But then we also revisit because it's going to keep changing over time too. Jen, you were a teacher. And so I just want to kind of wrap up with this. if you were back in the classroom and you had an opportunity to teach again, what are some things that you would be excited to use in this case? But what would be some things where you may want to put some boundaries up?
Well, I think I would still want my students to have those foundational skills. And so I would focus on those. I would also want to use AI as a tool for critical thinking rather than a substitute for critical thinking. And I think that's a huge distinction. I like to think, I wouldn't hide from it. I know there's some interesting effective tricks that are working, such as asking students to handwrite again and only turn in handwritten things. And I think that's kind of cool. But I also think we can't, we need to talk to kids about, critical thinking, smart interpretation of news, caution, a little bit of dubiousness. My children, the children I live with, they say, "Oh, you can't really believe anything on the internet." They know this. So let's talk about why. And it's a world where video and voice um, can be manipulated. There's another great article. I should send you these links to put in the show notes. It's about our socially isolated generation and how there's a real fear that companion AI will allow someone to make a best friend that's not even real. And so I think I'd be talking with my students about the critical importance of relationships, working through conflicts, not hiding from things that are hard because there's an AI tool to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to pretend for a moment that we have all the answers for something that everyone is still trying to figure out. And I felt this way 5 years ago, 10 years ago, with every new technology that comes out. I have been humbled enough to go, wow, I'm not really sure, but I'm going to try my best to understand and to move forward. But I will say this to leaders as we're wrapping up, Jen, that, I think I've said this in other settings, but I'm just going to say it here again, something that I would learn from a good friend of mine, Dr. Tim Elmore, which is that good leaders are committed to the timeless and the timely at the same time. So we hold on to what are the timeless principles that we know are good for people, are good for kids, the values that we hold on to, that the dignity that we show others. What are the ways that we know have always worked over time in terms of how human communities flourish together? That's the timeless. But then how do we stay timely? Like how do we also push ourselves to learn things we haven't learned before, to be aware of things we haven't been aware of before, not to put our head in the sand, so that we can respond to the timely with those timeless values. And I just I always have to kind of preach that to myself, because it just helps me to realize, okay, there's a foundation I can hold on to even when I'm unsure of what this new stuff is going to create, and try to balance the new off of those timeless values too. So I don't know if that's helpful for anybody else, but that's helpful for me. Emily, any other thoughts you want to add as we just pulled you in to the conversation as we wrap up? Because for anyone else that's working with young people who may want to keep in mind any additional thoughts that we haven't expressed.
I think one other thing that I was thinking about, kind of when Jen was talking about like what she would do as a teacher, is teaching people to recognize when images are AI generated, because they're getting harder and harder to detect. Like even I have trouble detecting AI generated images now, and that can be very dangerous. That can be very scary. But I think like there's always a little tell in AI generated images. And so learning to identify those can help stop the spread of misinformation and help keep it from being so scary and that kind of thing.
And when in doubt, especially when you're my age, you show it to your kids first. Because Jen, I've done that. Or my kids will get screen images of something and I'll be like, is this real? And they'll all chime in, Dad, look at the corner over here. You're going to see this. That is not real. This thing is not real. But you're right, Emily. It's getting harder and harder to know the difference. Well, Jen, any wrapping thoughts you want to add as we wrap up today's Monday
No.
Matters?
Yeah, no, nothing to add. I do think we should revisit this topic.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are worried about it. And one of the things I love the most about this podcast is we're willing to talk about tricky things. And I think principals, we'll be back with this. We'll think more and talk more and hear from you, and we'll come back.
Yeah, and I'm not going to hide the fact that AI has and you mentioned this too, Jen, there's been some great editorial uses I've had with AI. So I'm happy to also talk about that. But I also just listeners, if there's ways that you are already encountering the use because you're right in the midst of it with kids and teachers and in your own use, what's been the pros and cons for you? And what are some things that Jen and I can think about as we move forward? Well, Jen, it's February. I think by the time this comes out, you may have already been in Utah, and I may have already been up in Columbus to do some work up there too. So I'm getting a little bit of a break as I step into the next few weeks and months because I'm going to do most of my work virtually. What about you?
I'm getting ready for another trip to Canada to work with principals there. And then, the conference schedule this summer is kind of rolling in. So just trying to figure it all out.
Yeah. And then keep your antennae up because Jen and I have been talking about some potential PD that we may be offering to listeners as well. So that would give you an opportunity to connect with us over the summer. So we'll get that word out soon. But thank you, Jen Schwanke, for jumping into Monday Matters, and Principal Matters listeners, thank you for doing what matters. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Monday Matters.